Namaste. Amen, and blessed be. Today is a third sermon on the topic of beloved community. I decided to make this a three-part series because I wanted to spend a little time myself to better understand beloved community. And there's not a very good specific definition. What there is of a definition comes from a civil rights movement of the past and some pretty Christian theology. And we're grateful for that history and that background, but we need a definition that works for us here. This week, I realized that our ability to build beloved community depends greatly on our ability to live out one of the foundational pieces of our faith, universalism. You know, that second part of our name that often gets forgotten or mispronounced. Now, universalism traditionally referred to universal salvation. Our forebears believed that a good God, one that was worthy of our attention, would be too compassionate to condemn anyone to hell. They embraced that really radical belief of universal salvation as a counterbalance to a much more popular belief in a vengeful God that would randomly condemn the large majority of humanity to punishment. Now that kind of vengeful God seems really antiquated today. Even among Christians, the belief in that kind of punishment from God is mostly abandoned. Universalism, in that sense of divine punishment and salvation, is no longer a focus for us in our tradition. But still, we call ourselves universalists. And still, living out a commitment to the core of that message is vital to our life together. It's not the God and punishment part that's so important today, it's the humans being good enough part that we lift up. Each and every one of us in here and out there is good enough. The first one of our 7 principles reminds us of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. And sometimes that phrase gets inflated. Our shared belief in the inherent worth and dignity of people is sometimes misunderstood as a belief that people are perfect or great. That's not quite the point. It doesn't take long to look around or frankly look at our own lives to see that we are far from perfect. A better understanding of our universalist heritage, I think, is that we are enough. Not perfect, but we are all enough. We're worthy of love and compassion just as we are. You could probably name 10 things that we would like to sincerely improve on. Maybe to be more fit, or smarter, or kinder, or more curious, or more adventurous. I certainly have my list. We can improve ourselves. It's one of the most amazing things of our lives in this world that we live in. There are always opportunities to grow and to learn and to heal and transform. Creativity and growth is just built into this life. There are so many opportunities for more, but that doesn't mean that we aren't already enough. Right here. This simple analogy might help. Hopefully you like ice cream. To me, it is incredibly satisfying. It's why I don't keep it at home. A bowl of ice cream is a simple pleasure, and it's enough. You can always add more. You could add hot fudge, or maybe some chopped nuts, or whipped cream, but the ice cream itself is enough. It's good. Just because more is possible doesn't mean that what's currently here is inadequate. This is a hard thing to really believe about ourselves. How many of you feel like you're enough most of the time? Smart enough, fit enough, wealthy enough, good-looking enough, kind enough, generous enough. I feel like that some of the time. Most of the time would be a serious stretch. Beloved community that we aim to build at Tapestry is based on that radical message that you are enough, that each and every person we encounter is enough. Beloved community isn't about saying that, though. It's about demonstrating that truth through our actions. The mission of Friends of Orange County Detainees, you may be familiar with, is visiting immigrants in detention centers. It's one way that we practice universalism. Most of the folks in those detention centers that we visit have been there for pretty messed up reasons, with limited or no fault of their own. A few of them, though, have landed there because of some pretty poor life choices. We aim to visit everyone who requests a visit, though, regardless of their story. They're enough. They're worthy of some human companionship, and we do our best to show that. And we try to show that each and every time we gather here. That sense of welcome can look like a lot of different things. It may be remembering someone's name. It may be a hug. It may be listening to someone's difficult story without flinching or trying to explain it away as something that it's not. It may mean honoring someone's voice in a conversation, or making sure someone has a place to sit. Not because they're perfect or your best friend, but because they're enough. That's not easy. I've often heard this described as the reason to participate in Unitarian Universalist communities. The saying goes, don't come to find the people that you love, come to love the people you find. I'm going to say that again. Don't come to find the people you love, come to love the people you find. It's not easy, but it's what we aim to do. We aim to build the type of community that has room at the table for everyone. The type of community that has an expansive vision of welcome. To draw a circle wide enough to include larger and larger groups. Circles are funny things. Circles don't get bigger from the center. The circle only grows bigger from the periphery. The circle gets bigger when the line of what is included and what is not gets broken and pushed wider. It's not only true of geometry, it's also true of our human communities. Over and over again in the United States, we've seen marginalized people fight to expand the circle. There may be some allies at the center who occasionally help in those struggles, but the invitation is never made first from the center. Women fought for their right to vote, and they're still fighting for equal pay. Yes, some men were early to support their cause, but women were only included into the circle after tough, brave, wise women broke down the boundary wall that excluded them. Civil rights weren't given by white people. They were won by courageous, hardworking, deeply faithful African American communities. The long journey toward LGBT equality began in earnest when some drag queens and butch lesbians resisted the police and started a riot in the middle of New York City. 45 years later, the Power Center now recognizes same-sex relationships as valid. When communities that were once marginal become welcome at the center of society, it's helpful to remember how they got there. Not from a kind-hearted welcome from the Power Center, but from prophetic action to break down the periphery. I recently attended our Western Regional Assembly for the Unitarian Universalist Association. It was a conference for Unitarians from the western third, maybe half of the United States. And I attended all sorts of workshops and lectures and worship services, as you do. The one most powerful piece of that weekend that I brought with me was from our president of the UUA, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, who has some fans in this room, no doubt. She said that Unitarian Universalism will always have a foot planted at the center of the circle. As we claim several of the founders of the United States among our ranks, as we're still a largely white, highly educated denomination, we are and will have a foot firmly planted in the center of the circle. And that's why we must do our best to make sure the other foot is planted among marginalized communities who are prophetically breaking down walls of exclusion and expanding the circle. It's true in our congregations and true as a national faith community. If the circle expands from the periphery and beloved community grows there, then we have to do what we can to show up there as well. One very small step toward that goal is, believe it or not, making an adjustment to our name tags. This doesn't happen all at once. As we issue new name tags, we'll ask people if they would like to add their preferred gender pronouns to their name tags. More and more communities are doing this, putting preferred gender pronouns on name tags and name placards and email signatures. They clearly specify the gender pronouns that people prefer because not everyone's gender identity is completely obvious. There are a lot of reasons for that. Some of those reasons include being transgender or having hormonal or genetic situations that make gender not obvious, or just having a really bold sense of fashion. People's gender identity is not always obvious. So let's skip the confusion, skip the painful moment of misgendering someone, and just write it down. It's simple. I go by male pronouns, he, him, his, or I go by female pronouns, she, her, hers. We're going to put it on name tags. Of course, there's more to the world than black and white, and there's more to gender than male and female. Some people, especially in younger generations, find that gender binary of being either male or female is too limiting, so they go by gender-neutral pronouns. they, them, and theirs. It's a little more complicated because we aren't used to using that language. So we stick it on a name tag and make it clear and avoid the confusion. I know a handful of you are familiar with this. Some of you are not. For most of us, it's probably pretty new. And that's partly why I'm supporting and encouraging this effort. It gives us practice at stretching. Over time, we have all seen changes in what is appropriate or supportive to marginalized communities. I mean, the clearest example that we're probably all thinking of is the way Black or African American communities have understood themselves and asked to be identified. We learn to stretch our language. And stretching ourselves to widen the circle is the name of the game. Adapting our language is not the gold standard or final answer. Name tags are not the final answer. The fact is, there is no final answer to building beloved community, because the circle keeps expanding, or at least we hope the circle keeps expanding at Tapestry. Now, if this feels like just one more thing to have to remember, I want to remind you that 99% of stuff at Tapestry is optional. This name tag thing is optional. If you're getting a new one, we'll ask, or we can print yours if you want us to. No one is saying that you have to do X, Y, or Z to be good enough. We're not going to shame one another into complying with approved language and practices. Expanding the circle and building beloved community is not about inadequacy, it's quite the opposite. We hope to expand our welcome because we believe all people are enough. And we want them to believe it, too. We expand our welcome because that lesson of universalism is one that we learn about ourselves when we demonstrate it to our neighbors. Remember what I said earlier about universalism. You're enough, just as you are. You beautiful bowls of ice cream. You don't have to do anything extra to be good enough. Here, though, in our efforts to build beloved community, we're hoping to provide some opportunities, to add some sprinkles, to add some love, and maybe join with some different flavored ice creams to make a sundae. Pardon the pun. There's no room for time for shame among us. The beloved community is an invitation to us all. Accepting that invitation and showing up is a choice that each of us has to make. Amen.